Are we on?
John Gudgel, we're going to make some very brief opening comments, and then I'd like to hand it over to you, and maybe you could pass the call on different people from 365. Thank you.
Brian, you're live.
Okay, great. Good evening, everyone. This is Brian Hausch, and I want to welcome everyone to our special work session focused on two topics for June 12th, 2020. And Judy, could you call the roll, please?
Yes, Hausch.
I'm here.
McQueen.
John Gudgel, we're going to make some very brief opening comments, and then I'd like to hand it.
Stokes.
Here.
Krieger.
Present.
Curlis. Here. Also present, Village Manager Josue Samara.
Okay, thanks, Judy. And let me just talk a little bit about, Zoom meetings. Most of us are pretty used to them, but I want to highlight a few things to manage this meeting as much as possible and make it productive. The first is that Josue has put everyone on mute to avoid feedback and anything like that. Josue will unmute folks when they either raise their hand, which is under the reactions drop down at the bottom, or if you want to put in the chat box, which you can also find in the table at the bottom, to let us know that you would like to speak. The only other thing I want to highlight is that work sessions are an opportunity for council to learn more about key issues that we want to make the best decisions we can about. So this really is going to be about listening to you to help us think about our discussion at Monday's council meeting. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mary Ann McQueen for a few communications and an announcement.
Hi, everyone.
Okay.
The first announcement that I'd like to make, and I'm excited to make it, is that we are going to have a 4th of July parade. Yeah. And it's going to be on the 4th of July, which is Saturday. And it is being hosted by the Miami Township Fire Department and the Human Project. The theme of this year's 4th of July parade is Black Lives Matter. And there are various ways that people can participate in that. For example, I'm very interested in honoring African Americans in Yellow Springs. And I know that there are some other things being planned in that regard. So folks who want to participate are encouraged to create displays and or signs which reflect our village values and our commitment. Physical distance and masks, of course. The parade will be forming at 1 p.m. at the Friends Care community, and it will depart at 2 p.m. as usual. And for more information, you can contact Mike Miller or Bomani Moyenda. I am going to make sure that this gets on the village website, and I know it will be on other venues as well. And the fire department will be helping us with the physical distancing part of the parade. So I think it's very exciting. So now I'll list the people who have sent communications to council. And the communications have been about masks, more communications for some type of regulation than not. They have been about promoting the community outreach coordinator and having that be a full-time position. And also there have been letters supporting our village council passing a resolution about racism being a national mental health issue. So the people who've written letters are Carl Champney, Charlene Prestipino, the Starflower Business, Rose Sal, Kim Roman, Karen Wintrow, Cindy Olenek, Catherine Hitchcock, Jane Hawkinsmith Reich, Moira Laughlin, Nancy Mellon, Pan Reich, Susan Alberta, Priscilla Moore, Kate Hamilton, Judith Hempfling, Chris Powell, Kanetta Sanford, Emily Seibel, Shayna Hammock, and Rebecca Cooter and Sam Eckenrode.
Thank you, Mary Ann McQueen. So I again want to emphasize, because I know people join at different times, that if you want to make a statement, the information about the Zoom meeting should be in the chat for both Facebook Live as well as for our YouTube Live. So you can either use the link or you can call in by phone. And we will try our best to capture everything that's in the chats. We may not be able to get to every question during this time, but this is why I'm going to turn it over to Lisa Krieger so that we can start listening about.
Brian, can I say one more thing about the communications?
Yes.
That all of the communications that I listed will be in the council packet. So people can, if they're interested in seeing what everyone said, they can find out that way.
Okay, thanks, Mary Ann. So Lisa, why don't you frame our conversation about meaningful anti-racism action?
Thank you. So I'm really grateful to so many members of the community who took the time to call us and to write us. And I also want to include that to say thank you for those of you who wrote to the Yellow Springs News. As Brian mentioned, the purpose of this meeting is to have a listening session. We certainly, as a council, had some ideas of actions that we could take as the village council that would help to address this crisis. But we knew, or I knew, and Brian and I talked about it. I didn't talk to everybody because I can't. We knew that we needed to really listen first before we jumped into any conclusions of action that could have been led by our own personal biases. And I know I've had questions about whether racism is a public health crisis in the village. I believe that to diminish it locally would be a failure on our part, and that we need to find ways to not only address it with our own local policy changes, but to also know that there are other progressive, larger municipalities who are taking brave action, and we want to stand with them. So with that, I will, I think I'm going to pass the baton off to John Gudgel, who is joining us along with a number of other representatives from the 365 project to kick off our work session. John?
Thank you, Lisa. Thank you, Council. It's really exciting time in our lives. As I look on the screen, with the exception of maybe one or two people, I would safely guess that many of you are baby boomers. With that being said, you probably remember aspects of the civil rights movement from the 1960s. And here we are about 50 years later, and it seems as though that same type of feeling, albeit a little bit different this time in 2020 as opposed to the 1960s. What's different this time? The diversity of the people who are making statements, who are calling out for a change, not only from a diversity standpoint, but from an age standpoint. And when I say age, young people, I am so excited that tomorrow there is a group of young people that I and others from the 365 Project, Young People of Color, have been working with, and they are leading a early march at 12:30 prior to the rally and demonstration at 1 o'clock. And it's this energy from the young people that has many of them so excited, calling out for a change, not only from a diversity standpoint, but from an The other thing about technology, switching subjects, no, anyway. So I have 4 people in attendance, including myself. We're just going to speak briefly about aspects of racism and what the 365 Project and young people of color can bring to this age-old question, this 400-year-old United States history question of racism. So in your screen, you see Louise Smith. You also see Angela Allen, and Kevin McGruder is in another meeting, and he texted me and said he'll be joining us at about 5:10. So I've asked the 3 of them plus myself just to share different aspects on things that we see as a 365 Project, young people of color, that perhaps we can bring to the village and to share with Village Council. Does that sound pretty much like a plan? And we'll leave plenty of time for Q&As if possible. Okay. Louise, why don't we start off with you? And maybe you can talk about the work that you and others have done via the 365 Project in terms of racism and working with the council and specifically with the Yellow Springs Police.
Well, thank you, John. And I just want to say how honored I am to be part of 365. It's such an important component of the work that needs to be done here in the village. And, you know, particularly, you know, as a person in 365, I sometimes say, what am I doing to help? And where am I in all of this struggle? And one place I put effort into a few years back with a committee of people was to work with the local police department and, you know, try and create a different set of guidelines for the village that was more in tune with what our values are. And I just want to read a piece of a paragraph from a part of the police guidelines that, you know, was developed initially by Village Council and then revised through this committee, and also to acknowledge the work of the Justice System Task Force. But particularly in our committee, we really wanted language that said the words anti-racism. And this sentence here, the Village of Yellow Springs aims to be not simply tolerant, but proactively inclusive and anti-racist. The Village of Yellow Springs and our police department commit to identifying, challenging, and changing the values, structures, and behaviors that perpetuate systemic racism. That's a tall order, guys. I mean, that's a very tall order, but it's a necessary place to put down our feet in this moment. And specifically, our committee, which was Gavin DeVore, Leonard, Janet Mueller, and myself, working within 365, we were really advocating for some different things from Justice System Task Force with regard to the police department in regards to hiring and training, but also evaluating officers based on these community policing guidelines. And we're still, you know, there's still work to be done. We met with Chief Carlson a few days ago. And it's very clear that there's a whole paradigm shift that has to happen in policing that has to do with focusing, sorry, that's my dog, focusing more on services and serving the community versus enforcing against some kind of, you know, threat. So I wanted to outline the idea of, you know, evaluating the officers based on those actual principles that are in those guidelines. How are the police officers in our village developing an understanding of systemic racism and their, you know, sorry, and their part in trying to address it? How do they, you know, get trained to recognize implicit bias and work against it in their work? And how do they get held accountable in terms of evaluation and maybe termination if necessary? The other piece is citizen review of how the police department policies get written, for example, and how are they in alignment with these very important and, you know, demanding guidelines. But they're, if we could actually make this happen, it would be amazing. The addition of a social worker on the police force is a start, and rebalancing that to have even greater support of that kind is really important. Also, just want to say, as a mental health therapist, racism is a mental illness, and we're all in recovery from it. that is a really important thing that we have to change. So sorry, I'm jumping in after it. My brain's a little bit jellified from being on Zoom all day, but I hope I was clear. And thank you again, John, for inviting me in. Thank you, Council, for listening. And thanks to everybody. Just thanks. Yeah.
Questions for Louise regarding policy and language pertaining to police and systemic racism? Okay. Angela Allen. Angela, why don't you introduce yourself, because having grown up the community, just give people a little bit of background. You know, often, as I mentioned, us baby boomers, we coordinate and interact with each other, but one of the voices that's coming up that I mentioned earlier is young people, and you've been one of the main movers and shakers. So maybe if you talk a little bit about your history and what you've been up to lately, and just share out some visions and things that you think we as a village should embrace.
Yeah, hi, thank you for having me. Again, my name is Angela Allen. I grew up in Yellow Springs, deep roots in Yellow Springs family. And eventually I went off to college, Miami University, got my degree in criminal justice, and came back and have been here since the end of 2017. And so although right now I'm in Dayton, the Dayton area, but I'm still very much a part of my community of Yellow Springs, and that'll always be home to me. And so just given everything that's happening lately and representing the youth, and based off of youth conversation, peer conversation, with the movements and the fight for justice, transparency, and accountability, just thinking of ways that we could continue to further the progress of where we've come from. I think it would be beneficial to have what I call a community sit down with our police officers, just to make sure that as a village, we're continuing to strengthen our relationships with our PD and form a cohesive environment. And then to loosely quote Robert Peel's 9 principles of policing, the police are the community and the community are the police, with the exception of a badge and a paycheck. And I think to bring our officers into some of the conversations and have them engage and partake in would be beneficial, because they are a large part of our community. And one of the main elements that I want to talk about in this community sit down would be, aside from procedural justice, a main element of community policing would be collective efficacy. And that is holding our community members accountable, holding each other accountable to ensure the safety and the quality of our neighborhoods. Growing up, Yellow Springs was a safe space of genuine community and trust amongst one another. And I feel like we are starting to stray from that a little bit more, in large part because of the implicit biases, the racism, and the prejudice throughout our community. And so I would love to encourage our officers to be there to discuss questions, like Louise mentioned, of how racism amongst our community and systemic racism impacts them and what they're doing to combat it and correct it. I'm still kind of working on the agenda and the outline of it, just because I want this discussion that we have to serve as a blueprint for other cities, other bigger cities, for people to step up and host these conversations with their police department. So I would love to hear your thoughts on that. Sorry, that was a little bit of a ramble.
So Angela, you met earlier Chief Carlson, and he's on this call. I don't know if you want to share aspects with that. I know some of it might have been kind of in a planning stage, but maybe you could allude a little bit to that. And when you say we, are you talking about we community or we the youth, or both?
Both, really. I mean, the community obviously is, we want to do everything one voice, one purpose, one mission. But it is important to engage the youth just as much as it is with the police department, bring everybody into it. The conversation that I had with Chief Carlson was great. really insightful. And just the fact that he was excited to sit down and, thinking about volunteers from the police department to come and talk with some of the community members. I did mention to him that I wanted it to be informal yet structured, because I want people to be real with each other. I'm not saying we're going to all be sitting around holding hands and hugging each other at the end of it. With anything, there are growing pains, but I kind of want it to be productive and for us to all just come together and see where we can go to better our relations. So.
Thank you, Angela. As a community, it really instills a sense of pride in us when we see young people such as yourself coming back to the community and just articulating your thoughts. I remember you in middle school, but I'm not going to say anymore because we're in a public meeting. So it's really great to see you coming back to your community, and the fact that council, I don't know if you know, and others, there are about 10 or 11 young people who were at our 365 project meeting this past Monday. And these 10 to 11 young people, some are current Yellow Springs High School students, a couple of them just recently graduated, and then those like Angela who have graduated from college or are in college who are committed to working with the village. So we need to seize the moment with these young people that we have. And Ms. Kanine, you had some of these young people in your class when you were teaching, so yeah. I don't know if Kevin McGruder has joined us or not. If not, I'll go ahead with my piece, and then perhaps Kevin will join us. And then if there's some Q&A, follow-up discussions, we can go from there. On my section, one of the things that the 365 project is very adamant about are courageous conversations about race. And as Angela alluded to, when you start talking about race, people get uncomfortable. And that's part of it. I know, Kevin Stokes, you were part of one of those initial conversations about race that Lynn Kramer has sponsored via the 365 project. It behooves us as a community to engage in the tough conversation about race. We're not going to solve it with one community meeting. We're going to be uncomfortable, but we have to trust each other. The Yellow Springs Schools, Dr. Holden has already launched a book talk with the staff, and we are going to launch a book talk with the kids, and we're looking at several books that will be followed up with some hard conversations. And she and the school district is committed to doing something on a monthly basis with an outcome at the end of the school year next June. So I think it behooves us again as a community to have these courageous conversations and expect to be uncomfortable. Expect to be uncomfortable. And so that's one thing that I would encourage people to, where possible, engage in those conversations, whether it's in a formal environment, such as what Lynn Kramer is doing with the Courageous Conversations, or if it's just informal conversations. Sometimes we have to call out folks, whether it's relatives or friends, when they make inappropriate comments or they say or do inappropriate things. I know it takes us out of our comfort zone, but that's something that we have to push the agenda on. The other thing I want to talk about, Chief Carlson about 2 years ago approached me about police officers coming in to Mills Lawn Elementary School and meeting and dialoguing with students through my classes. And we've been doing that for 2 years. And you wouldn't believe how helpful that is with our young people when officers come to the school, and our young people will ask the officers tough questions. But as Chief Carlson and I have discussed, we need to expand that program beyond the elementary school. We need to get into the middle school. We need to get into the high school, because it's often those students who are making the comments where they sometimes make statements such as, well, the police are following me, or I'm being profiled, or they don't know me. And I know, Angela, you talked about that experience as a student at the high school, that we don't know the police. So I think that's one big step that the village can encourage. The school system's on board, Dr. Holden's on board, Chief Carlson's on board. If we can expand those police visits to the schools so that our students get the opportunity to know our police officers. The social worker component, I've worked hand in hand with Florence Randolph on many tough situations. And I wish we could clone you, Florence. I see you there listed on the grid screen. I wish we could clone you and clone your position, because I think that is a key element in terms of addressing needs in our village, not only from a systemic racism standpoint, but just in general as it pertains to our overall health as a community. The hiring practices, Louise, you talked about the hiring practices, dealing with aspects of bias and racism. We have to be on guard. Our young people, particularly our young people of color, they feel that when they go downtown, that they are strangers in their own town. And they have consistently commented that, Mr. Gudgel, when we go downtown, we feel like we're being profiled, whether it's by the tourists, whether it's by shopkeepers, but there's something going on in the air where our young people of color feel as though they can't even go downtown and earn their respect, or with the word I'm looking for, and not be judged by the color of their skin. So that's something that they've talked about, and perhaps it's something we can work with Karen Wintrow through the Chamber of Commerce, maybe working with the shopkeepers and the business owners, and maybe having one of those courageous conversations with some of those folks. I don't want to ramble on. I'm hoping that Kevin's ready to talk about aspects that he would like to talk about, but I don't see him on the screen yet. So maybe with that being said, if there's questions or comments that you might have, council members, those at large.
I just wanted to add on to what you just said, John, regarding Antioch students and students coming coming to Antioch, and their discomfort and their feeling of being profiled in town. Students, Black students, students of color, and that sense of being looked at or feeling unwelcome in the village. And so I just want to kind of underline that point, that sometimes it's these subtle, death by 1,000 blows kind of microaggressive type of behavior that happens, that's unconscious, that we don't even register, that really can hurt, and hurt over and over again. We know that has a big effect on people. So it's not just the high school, it's also the Antioch students. I've talked to numerous students who have mentioned that feeling.
Mm-hmm. And Kevin was going to address that. And I know just before we went on the lockdown, I had a meeting with Josue, Chief Carlson. We were in the process of beginning to offer some mediation sessions. I know for the past couple of weeks, we have been overwhelmed with different book resources, videos, and whatnot. And one of the videos that struck me, and Kevin, you might have seen this, Kevin Stokes, is a video by Procter & Gamble called The Look. Have any of you seen? It's a short 1 minute, 44-second video called The Look. And it involves a Black man and his son. And this Black man and his son are going throughout the community. In one instance, they're at a swimming pool, and they're in the pool, and there are white people who are also at the pool, and they give this African-American gentleman, this Black American and his son, the look, like, why are you in the pool? They don't say it, but you see it by the look. Then he's outside with his son, and people drive by in the car, and they roll up the window, and they give him the look. And then finally, he's in an office building of some sort, this Black American, this gentleman, and he tries to get to the elevator, and the elevator closes in on him, and he gets the look. The final scene of this video pans as if there's a camera on top of his head, and he's walking into a courtroom, and everybody gives him the look. Do you know why they give him the look?
He's an attorney?
He's the judge.
Oh.
He's the judge. But away from the courtroom, as a Black American male, he gets the look all the time. He walks into the courtroom as the judge. Yeah, he really gets the look. So if you get a chance, I'm sorry I spoiled it for you, but still it's a good view. It's called The Look. put out by P&G, 1 minute, 44-second video. But it kind of encapsulates a lot of what we're talking about this evening. So I still don't see Kevin. So Louise, Angela, and I saw questions.
For the citizen review board, I think we called it. Could somebody kind of explain what it's composed of and how often we review and who we're reviewing? And
so Lisa, you want to jump on?
Yeah, this is Lisa. Hi, Angela.
Hi.
And first I want to say John and Louise and Angela, and thank you for coming and speaking. We developed a preliminary plan for a citizen review board working with John and through the mediation program as a way to approach establishing the program. And we also had conversations with Janet Mueller, who I don't know if you've met yet, but she was the director of the Dayton mediation, and they had a successful citizen review group that lost some momentum because of a shift in leadership, but that worked very effectively. So we were in the earliest stages of standing that up, and I'd be glad to share with you and others, reviving that documentation that was part of the work of council. Then, in addition to that, and you will see in the chat that Pan mentioned something about this. Last year, we also worked with a consultant who has quite a background in community policing, and out of that project were a series of recommendations. And we were glad that among those recommendations was that we could set up a citizen review panel. As we were trying to think through that back when we had the Justice System Task Force, there were some, I guess I could say, naysayers about that because they said we're too small, the village is too small, the police department's too small, it's too complicated to do. But I am dedicated to trying to do it, and I believe that I still have support of council to work towards that in collaboration with mediation, people who are skilled communicators and listeners, and the intersection with 365. So I would be happy to talk more about that. And you may have seen the letter to the editor signed by me and Brian Hausch, and we, in that letter, promised to pick up this work and move quickly. So Angela, I hope you can be involved with that.
Yeah, it's definitely really exciting to hear. Like I said, collective efficacy was something that I really wanted to focus on. And I think a board to, for one, I think the board should be composed of youth as well, just because if you're not saying that the officers are on trial, when we have these conversations or these discussions, but with the jury, it's of your peers, and being that the police are part of our community from high school up or middle school up, we should all have a seat. And I think that'll just open the conversation as well as us getting to know our officers a little bit better. So if we did have something to, just like with any job, I played volleyball for Miami, and I would sit down with my coach often and we would talk about my performance and what areas I wanted to improve on and what areas I was having difficulty in. And I think that would be truly pivotal and beneficial in our relationship with our police department, just because there is still some, there are still issues between us that we need to deal with. And so I think this is just one step closer to kind of ironing those out. So yeah, I'm excited, and I would definitely love to be a part of that.
Thank you, Angela. And I really will echo what John Gudgel said. I was also on that 365 meeting, and I haven't had very many moments of joy in the last couple of weeks, but the involvement of you, Angela, and other young leaders stepping up in the village and saying, no, we're getting involved here. And in fact, we're going to lead is like the best thing that I've experienced in weeks. I agree with you. And I'm so glad that whatever it's, that it's been horrible lately. And I thank you.
Oh, thank you so much.
Yeah, I also want to just mention in terms of kind of this work session, Angela, when you asked how we felt about, the community sit down initiative, yeah, that's exactly what we're wanting to talk about in this meeting and moving forward. So it seems like that's an initiative that would fit nicely in that citizen review board, especially in terms of how it develops in response to those needs. So this is definitely going to be a piece. And I do want to just speak for all council members in, if it appears that we're not asking a lot of questions, it is because we want to give time to listen and absorb that. But this is exactly what we want to hear. So thank you.
Sure.
And I think related to that, I wanted to check in because we've got about 25 minutes. If there are other folks on the call that wanted to raise any issues, ask any questions, and remember again, let us know either through the chat so we can unmute you or by raising your hand on the Zoom reactions menu.
Dr. McGruder's on the call now.
Oh, great. Okay, well, let's get Kevin in.
Kevin had texted me and he was in his car, so he said he would be home in a few minutes. So, Kevin, are you there?
This is Lisa. Judith Ezekiel, I don't want to put you on the spot if you don't want to speak, but I was interested in your chat entry about the UNESCO International Coalition of Inclusive and Sustainable Cities and work that you have done in Toulouse. So I'm wondering if you would be comfortable saying a little bit more about that.
I don't have a whole lot to add to the comment I made. I just know that when I was in a group in Toulouse, they were involved in the European component, which specifically said it's cities against racism, and that a lot of places around the world are developing specific protocols that you can apply to not just actions against racism, but everyday actions. I know we did this in gender inequality as well. So I know the Dutch, for instance, had these amazing protocols. When you're doing a park, there would be 10 points to look to make sure that they ended up being favorable to women's equality. And you could do the same as far as racism. And this isn't just putting lights so that it's, brighter and safer. There are all sorts of much more subtle and interesting points that you can raise on that. So
I definitely will look into it, and it also sounds actionable. So that's helpful. Thank you very much, Judith.
Okay.
Kevin mentioned that he couldn't hear folks. So I don't know, Josue, if there's anything from a technical standpoint, or if he could. Oh, he said he can hear now. Kevin, can you speak to us on your portion?
Yeah.
Oh, here we go. Thank you.
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Okay. So Angela, Louise, and myself shared out our portion. So if you're prepared, you can share out the aspect segment of what you were going to present to us. Sorry. Kevin? Well, until Kevin gets on board, other questions?
This is Laura Curlis, and I really appreciate all the comments. Louise said something that caught my interest because the topic is bigger than police. It's about racism and how it affects all public health. she said it's a mental illness from which we all are recovering. And I just would love to hear her expand on that a little bit.
Sure. I think, it's funny, there's this inner work that has to happen about how we've internalized these systems. And we have to become aware that we have those things inside of ourselves. And for Black people and white people, the way we've internalized this system is very different, but it's a system of racism and white supremacy that we've all internalized. And we have to work on that. And it's kind of like a system. And I have to attribute that to a woman named Ruth King, who wrote a book called Mindful of Race. Excuse me. And she purports to work on this idea of our own awareness of this inside ourselves, and that things can't change until we address it. Excuse me. So, and it's something that in my workplace right now, we're having a group to talk about as therapists, how do we help people deal with racial trauma? There's been a lot of writing about this recently. I have a tickle in my throat, so I'm going to not say more, but I hope that gives a little background. But Ruth King, Mindful of Race, is an amazing book. But there are so many now that I'm excited about hearing about what the schools are reading so that we can all read those books. Thank you.
So actually related to this question, I see that Cindy Sieck is on the call. And Cindy, I wonder if you might also elaborate a little bit on Laura's question.
About racism as a public health issue?
Yep.
Is that what your question was focused on, Laura?
Yes, I asked specifically about mental health, but obviously racism results in physical stress, apart from the trauma violence that happens, of course. But just any public health aspect you would like to comment on would be great.
Sure. So, I mean, that's the idea of racism as a social determinant of health isn't something that is new in the public health frame. It's really fantastic to hear that expanded outside of public health and hear, so many communities that are talking about it. And I'm really glad that our community is talking about it and adding specific plans, to how we might, as a local group, address the issues. And I think, these conversations are really the only way that we get to the impact here and what we can do kind of beyond, what happens at the national levels and the state levels. I don't know what more I could have to say about that. But I wanted to say, I've heard people saying such amazing things about Florence Randolph, and I want to add to that and share an experience that I had with some conversations with some officers when I was interviewing Florence and some of the officers for our Culture of Health application. And what really stuck with me about their comments, and I'm sorry, Laura, this isn't related at all to your question, but was the impact on them of having that kind of support, and how they talked about, she encouraged them to work with the kids who come to the Bryan Center, and they loved it. They talked about, how we did math, and then we went and played Frisbee in the gym, and they talked about those relationships. But the other really important thing that I think they said is that this was two very young officers, and, they had never worked in a place where they had this kind of support, and what a difference that made in their confidence as officers, and that they felt like if they, encountered someone who needed more help than they could provide, they knew that Florence would follow up, and so they felt comfortable engaging around issues that they might have shied away from without that support.
Thanks for sharing that, Cindy. And I saw Judith Ezekiel's hand up. Did you still want to say something, Judith?
Hold on, unmuting. Yes. Just a quick comment about the health impact of racism. I was in a research group that had a lot of people working on epidemiology. I don't myself, but so for instance, one thing is when you look at hypertension, and this has been an issue since, I mean, people have been aware of this since the 1990s, you can correct for every socioeconomic phenomenon that we know how to measure. And there still is excess hypertension among Blacks, in not everywhere in the world, but certainly in the US and a few other places in the Western world. And the only thing they could figure out to conclude was that racism was a factor of hypertension. And there are a lot of illnesses beyond mental health and then of course violence that where racism is an independent factor in affecting Black people's health. And that's not even getting into, access to healthcare and discriminatory practices of healthcare workers. They've studied and they've shown that healthcare professionals think that Blacks have a higher tolerance for pain and will give less anesthesia to Black people. So even beyond that, racism has been shown by epidemiologists to be an independent factor in healthcare. And when you decide to call racism a health issue, a health crisis, it means that you are opening up new areas of research and funding and practices. And so that would be very important for those to follow through with concrete, policy and protocol change. But even just declaring it, I just wanted to say that in favor of doing so. And might be interesting to, I don't know if the Village has talked, but this has been done for violence against women as well. And so, for instance, the March of Dimes, which is not a very radical feminist organization, declared that violence against women is a major healthcare crisis for fetuses, newborns, and for pregnant women, because it's one of the main causes of malformed babies. So I mean, that's the same kind of dynamic, and we might also look at what happened after various national and international organizations declared violence against women to be a part of a health crisis.
Sorry to interrupt. I see Kevin McGruder's back on. Kevin, can you hear us? Technical difficulties. I apologize.
So we do have, it looks like we have Kevin unmuted. Kevin, you want to try again or? Okay. Well, oh, there's something. Connecting to audio. No, maybe? Okay. So as we're trying to get Kevin on the line, any other questions or comments?
So I will share that the school district, I just looked up, the first book we're going to read as a school district is How to Be Anti-Racist by Ibram X. Kendi. So How to Be Anti-Racist by Ibram X. Kendi. And in a conversation with Dr. Holden, there's a possibility that she will try to expand that out to the community, but I'm sure that's something that have to be coordinated community-wide. But from a school standpoint, and we're looking at reading probably 3 books throughout the course of the year, but that's going to be the first one.
Can I make a comment back to you generally? And John Gudgel, I had made the comment to Terry Holden, but have not yet heard back from her, that it's difficult for me to think about addressing anti-racism without talking about trauma and trauma-informed teaching particularly, because I think very frequently teachers look at a child who is misbehaving, and unfortunately that is very frequently young African-American males, and see that as simple misbehavior when if they have a background in trauma-informed teaching and can take a different approach, there's often very, very different outcome. And I think that can also be shifted upward into policing and talking about maybe trauma-informed policing. So I just wanted to throw that out there.
Thank you, Judy. The social emotional learning component, SEL, Dr. Holden and I were talking earlier, and she wants to undertake a study of our discipline data and how it impacts our kids of color, and that whole emotional piece, and how our teachers interact from a cultural standpoint with our students, particularly our kids of color. Sadly, sometimes I feel like I'm the go-to person when kids of color are struggling. Well, let's go see John. And sometimes I just want to be bold enough to say, and I'm almost at the point of, I'm going to say it tonight, sometimes it's not John Gudgell's a black man dealing with a black kid. Sometimes it's just a problem. And sometimes it's a white teacher's problem. And so those are areas that Dr. Holden and we talked about that, ironically, Judy, about the social emotional learning aspect as well as discipline and how we discipline our students of color. So thank you.
Thank you.
I'm seeing some good comments in the chat. So Pan, you had some comments earlier. Did you want to say anything?
Hi. No, I think my questions were answered for the most part. I think that Florence, a social worker, is very competent. I've worked with her at Antioch. We're very lucky to have her there. It's just my concern, and I asked her about how is she being utilized. You know, are the officers calling her to scenes? You know, scenes that might be better handled by a social worker than a police officer, and that she wasn't. The answer I was feeling was that she was not. So my question is, are the officers being trained as to when they can utilize her and how they can utilize her, how they can call her to the scene? You know, she's not just there to help people who have shortages of food or clothing. She's there to help manage real people problems. So, and I think if the officers aren't being proactive in bringing her into the scene, that we could make better use of her as a resource.
This is Florence. I am on the call. And Pan, I just need to correct you, but the officers are calling me to the scene when it's appropriate for me to be there. And if they don't call me to the scene when it's not appropriate, they always give me a follow-up, a status of what's going on, and then I can follow up. So yes, they are using me appropriately. And they have all been trained in the CIT, and they're being trained in QPR, and they have been trained to respond to instances where there is some tension, or if there's some sort of need for further help or training, they seek that. So yes.
Oh, thank you. That's good to hear. And in retrospect, it was about a year ago at least that I asked you that question, and it didn't feel to me like that was the case at that time.
Yeah, I think I remember that, and it didn't feel to me that you were asking that question for information purposes, so I didn't really know how to answer you. So glad you brought that out.
Thank you.
Kevin McGruder said that he was having problems logging in, so he went on and logged off, and he apologizes. One thing I did want to share is that Kevin and the 365 Project have put together a brochure through the Yellow Springs Chamber of Commerce, and this brochure is being specifically targeted to people of color in terms of considering Yellow Springs as a destination place of residence. And so that's one thing that the 365 Project is trying to promote, particularly towards people of color, as the demographics of our community have changed over the years, particularly in terms of the loss of people of color. The 365 Project feels as though that we can put out information saying that, hey, this is a good place for people of color. Yes, we got issues and we've had our hiccups, but we want to highlight aspects of Yellow Springs in terms of attracting people of color. So he was going to speak about that brochure. I'll talk to him, and if you have not seen that brochure, council, we'll make sure you get copies of it.
The other thing I wanted to mention, this is Florence again, Mr. Gudgell, is that I've worked also with Kevin at Antioch. I'm over at Antioch, well, I was before the COVID, twice monthly, dealing with the students and when they have questions and needs. So I don't know if Kevin was going to speak on that, but we have developed a relationship. And Dr. Nzinga Delilah, who I tried to contact today to be on this call, is instrumental in connecting the students with myself and resources and making them feel welcome in this community.
Thank you, Florence.
Okay, so we've got about 5 more minutes for questions or comments related to this topic. Anything else that people would like to ask or share? And remember, you should let us know in the chat or by raising your hand. Okay. Mayor Pam, do you want to say anything before we wrap this up?
One thing that was on my mind as Mrs. Randolph was talking was the value that she plays in the mayor's court. And if I have a particularly challenging or a case in which she could prove beneficial, I always give her a call, and she's very quick to come up and either work behind the scenes with me and with the defendant or together with us. So I just want everyone to know that not only is she cloistered down in the police department, but she comes upstairs too and is a contributing, very valuable resource for the mayor's court. Thank you.
And I might add that particularly for our families of color, especially if they're relatively new to the village, Florence has served admirably in terms of being a contact person at the higher levels of government. And often Florence and I work hand in hand. Sometimes there's that trust factor from aspects of racism. Sometimes people of color are distrustful of white people who are in positions of power. And Florence has served as a good conduit to those situations that arise when people of color are like, well, I don't want to speak to someone at the village building. I'm afraid to talk to the principal because he or she is white. So it's been a real asset. And I'm not saying just because Florence is a woman of color, but certainly that has been an asset to her position. And her and I have, again, worked hand in hand, but she certainly has been far, far ahead of the things that I'm able to do in terms of reaching out to families and being a good contact resource for people. Thank you, Florence.
Folks, Matthew Carson says he's had his hand up, so could he be unmuted to comment?
Yep.
Hey, thanks for letting me talk. There's 2 things that I wanted to bring up. I'm really glad that everyone's having this discussion. I think it's the right conversation to have, and I'm really impressed with what you were saying there, John. So thank you for that. 2 things though. One, we spend $1.5 million on our budget every year about on policing in Yellow Springs. Our youth center, we spend less than $10,000, right? So, I mean, when we talk about these kind of things, I think we really need to talk about what we're prioritizing as far as where we're spending money, because we can talk about these things, but if there's no money behind it, there's no money for programs behind it, we're really gonna be still facing the same kinds of problems. The second thing that I would like to bring up is, and John was kind of touching on this, but I wanted to sort of piggyback on that. When we talk about, having a social worker that people can reach out to, that's great. But if they're embedded within the police department, that's still a problem, in my opinion. Police departments can and will use anything, you say against you in a court of law, right? I mean, that's a real scary thing. Social workers who are seen as adversarial in that sense, which in my opinion and in my opinion, it's still an adversarial position when they're embedded with the police department versus if they're independent of the police department. So I think that's really something that we should be considering here. We should really be shifting resources away from policing and towards public health. And on top of that, really dividing out our social work, strategy away from our police department. So thanks for letting me talk.
Thank you, Matthew. And I think I'm going to, I know that I saw new people get on, and I understand that there's more feedback to be heard. And so remember to communicate with a council member, send an email, send a letter, give us a call. We want to keep listening. And again, we will be talking about at our Monday council meeting, recognizing racism is a public health crisis. But the most important thing to us is that we want to actually be doing something about it or continuing to work on the things that we've been doing. And so we're not looking to just make a statement without starting to move forward. And I think all the things that we've heard, including our funding priorities that Matthew just brought up, are things that we've been thinking about, we're listening to, and this conversation is helping us to refine those ideas. So I appreciate everyone. Thanks again to the folks from the 365 Project, all the other citizens that gave feedback. This was a really good conversation, but as Angela mentioned, this is something that needs to continue. And so I will finally say that another action that we're committed to, and we will talk more on Monday at the council meeting, is moving forward with the advisory committee around the justice system. And so this kind of relates to what Pam brought up in the chat about recommendations that were made by a consultant. This relates to continuing to prioritize this work and look at how we can more effectively use our social worker and all the other things that we can do on a systemic level that are going to make a difference. So I'm closing out with that, but understanding that there's more to be talked about, and this is an ongoing conversation, that the village is committed to working with everyone to continue to take action. We've got a good precedent for that. We're going to continue to do that, and we need your help. So we're going to transition into the second part of the agenda. And I think I will briefly frame this and remind people again that if you would like to speak, please let us know in the chat or by raising your hand with the reaction hand thing, although it seems like that doesn't always work so well. So let us know in the chat. And the second thing is that we are structuring this as a listening work session. So we want to hear your thoughts and understanding that this will be talked about more at our Monday council meeting. So with that, Josue, did we get anyone from Greene County Public Health on this call?
No, we do not have anyone joining this call, Brian, but we do have a letter from Melissa Howe that will be in the packet and several articles, and including a resolution from Franklin County on declaration of racism as a public health crisis. And so while they're not here, they have sent in material to be discussed or available to council on Monday.
Okay, great. So then I think without Greene County Public Health, we've had discussions in the past that have highlighted, some of the perspectives that Police Chief Carlson and our village manager and council have. So I'd like to shift directly into hearing from any citizens that would like to ask questions or make comments.
I see a comment from Lori Sparrow Knapp. Could she be unmuted to speak, please?
Well, hello, everyone. Thank you for letting me speak. I want to state up front, talking around masks in particular. First of all, I do not live in the village, but I work in the village as part of the school, and I feel I am a part of the village with my work through Yellow Springs Theater Company, and I'm in the village every day, many times a day, and even though I'm only a few miles north, it is the place that I call my true north. And I have been coming into town in weekends since the state has been open up, and I've been a little shocked at the lack of social distancing from visitors from our community. I've been a little shocked at the lack of masks on our sidewalks and streets. Talking with former students, some of this who work in the village, and hearing about some of the experiences that they are having with customers coming into the business. Some people are doing great, but other students have encountered people who have become very, very hostile when asked to wear a mask in a business that's requiring it. And I normally don't come to these things, but I just feel that this is science. And we know that masks can prevent spread, and we are sitting, I think, pretty clearly from what the news is saying on this idea that we are about to get really big blooms all over the country from reopening. I love the shops of Yellow Springs and the people I know who run them. And I worry about their viral load from people who are not socially distancing in a manner in our community that will keep our folks safe. When I do come into town, I do see our elderly wearing masks. I do see some of our residents wearing masks. But it's this idea that somehow wearing a mask has been politicized, and it's not a political issue. It's science, and it keeps people safe. And I just wanted to come to council and ask about, would it be, I mean, is it even an option to create an idea around Yellow Springs being a safe place to shop for those who understand and want to support scientific fact that by wearing a mask, you will decrease your viral load? I wonder what we're telling our students by not saying that we need to do this. This has been so politicized, and it just seems like it's the right thing to do. Thank you for letting me speak.
Thank you, Lori. That great thoughts to share. And I think that concept about a safe place to shop is really interesting. Do we have other comments or questions?
Brian, if I may, Police Chief Brian Carlson and I am on that line, and if we haven't said anything, it's because we're on listening mode. We're listening to all of our constituents, and this is your platform. This is the constituents' platform. So we're listening. Us not speaking here, it's not that we're silent on these issues or not doing anything. We're just prioritizing this platform to hear from our residents.
Yeah, thanks for mentioning or highlighting that, Josue, because I know people have joined in at different points in the conversation. So are you guys seeing any comments in chats?
Well, Judith
has her hand up.
And Pan put in the chat that he's in the stack.
Okay. All right. So Judith Ezekiel?
Yeah, I just wrote in a chat on the side, but I have been pretty strictly self-quarantining because of my age, and I have some conditions that make me very high risk. And so yesterday morning, I went down to pick up some stuff at the Emporium window. The workers there were being very good, but all around me, there were people, not one had a mask on. When I asked somebody to keep their distance, they got obnoxious. They weren't respecting the distancing. And I think the village should make it a requirement. There are very few people who have legitimate medical reasons for not wearing them. There are a couple of conditions, but not many. And most of the reasons people give are absolutely not supported by science. And I don't know why we would have a different attitude towards passive smoke, towards speeding, towards assault, towards all of these, and wearing masks. Everybody is saying, if we don't really respect the 6 feet difference and everyone wear masks, that we're in for another serious and possibly worse rise of COVID and death from COVID. So, I'm watching how it's happening in other states and other countries, and we can do much better. My question is, why can't we mandate mask wearing except for permission, some documented medical reason?
All right, thank you, Judith. So was that an indication that Pan Reich had something to comment?
Hi, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So some of you already know I've been living COVID-19 since the beginning. I work at Miami Valley Hospital, and we've taken over managing 12,000 employees when they become sick and or exposed, and the quarantine and isolation they need to make. All of Premier Health Partners and all of Kettering, we require masks of visitors, patients, and all employees in the hallway. And it's because the science supports it. It works. You know, to put this on the shop owners, the shopkeepers, you know, the people working in the stores making barely minimum wage, they must wear a mask to protect the customers, but the customers don't have to wear one when they come in. I think that's terribly unfair. And there have been issues with that before. Some stores require it and others do not. The big question is, there's 3,700 people who live here. This is our home. And yet we host hundreds of thousands of tourists a year. I support them coming here. You know, I love sharing our village with them. It's it's a huge part of the economics of our village and of my family as well. I want them coming here. Most of them are respectful, but they're not wearing masks when they come here. The villagers are, and the tourists are not. And they're coming from cities where there's much higher incidence of COVID-19 than there is here in our village. Just today, I had to walk in the street to get past one of the stores, shops that has tables out on the sidewalk, and there was congregated with tourists not wearing masks, and there was no way that I could walk past on the sidewalk without being this close to people not wearing masks. And this isn't even the weekend, you know, this was for Friday. I think we owe it to the villagers who have to go downtown to get food and you know, medicine and hardware and for other reasons, as well as those who are working down there, to support them. Brian, you shared a couple of weeks ago that you had a conversation with Governor Mike, and he shared with you that we do have the legal right to pass an ordinance that will require masks. And so far as enforcement is concerned, I anticipate it will be exactly like when smoking was outlawed in public places. You know, we had a few days, a short period of time of tough love enforcement, and people then just accepted it as the new reality. That's the way it is. And it's not even a permanent, you know, it's probably going to be through the end of the year, maybe into a month or two into next year before we have, if we're blessed that way, to have immunizations present. But in the meantime, we can save lives in this village with a very little pain involved. And I sent you a letter outlining a few more details, and I don't want to take up all the time, but I just wanted to make that point. Most villagers I've spoken with are very much in favor of having masks mandated downtown. And I think the previous point of, we can use this as a marketing tool. People that want to go somewhere safe to shop, come to Yellow Springs. We're going to Costco even more because they're requiring masks. You can't go to Costco and shop unless you're wearing a mask. You know, and there's a few other stores that are doing very safe methods, but not requiring masks, and we feel unsafe when we go there. Thank you for your time.
Yeah, thank you, Pan. Yeah, really good highlights, and we appreciate your perspective too, being in the field. Kellyanne.
There we go. Thank you, guys. First of all, I really want to say that I commend our leaders here in Yellow Springs. When COVID first came out, man, I saw you guys come together. Groups were formed, resources were identified, needs were assessed. We immediately started caring for our Yellow Springers. And I told all my friends who lived in other parts of the country that, man, I am such a lucky girl to be here in Yellow Springs, because I know what I'm seeing here isn't happening around the world and across the country. That, boy, our people really take care of each other here, and that was really noted. I myself have committed to assist our village by being the grocery shopper at Tom's, and have for the last almost 4 months, 5 days a week, supplied our villagers with their groceries along with my team and my buddy Robert from the senior center. So we've really watched as this has occurred, and people wearing masks, people not wearing masks, and I'm out on the street at least a couple hours Monday or Tuesday through Saturday, seeing what's going on. And, I think that we've been nice about it. I think that we've gone out of our way to ask, to plead, to beg, to be safe. And it's just, our cries are going unheard. When obviously everyone who comes into our town can't even read, when we have 3 flashing signs that says masks have to be on, and everywhere you look, they're not. And I have to tell you that it's real personal for me, because I've already lost a baby in our family due to the mama having COVID during pregnancy. We've had other family members that we thought were going to die in the hospital alone because we weren't able to get into the hospital when they were sick. And now my grandson just got diagnosed with COVID, who has been spending time with my son and his wife for the last 2 weeks, and they both are high risk. So this is really scary for a lot of us, and very much at home for a lot of us. And I really ask that you guys really take a look at what's good for the majority, even though there's a very much of a minority who might be pushing back. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Kellyanne. I have Troy next.
Thank you, Matt. I appreciate that. And thank you, Lori. Thank you, Judith. Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Pam, for all of your comments. I agree wholeheartedly with that. I am at a point where I have to take a very deep breath every time I go downtown, because I don't know what I'm going to be met with from people who don't have masks, right? I really have to gird myself to face that. So Matt brought up an interesting fact, and I just double checked it. So we've got a $1.5 million police budget. I think that we can absolutely use part of that budget to enforce mask wearing downtown. And if you're not going to do that, then I think the council needs to take a very serious look at what we are budgeting our police for. Thank you.
Thank you, Troy. Mayor Pam, I have you next.
Three words for everyone. Law enforcement nightmare with the mask wearing. I have agreed with everyone that's spoken so far about the efficacy, the desire to have our visitors wearing masks. But when I look at the fact that we've just finished a discussion on policing, what we'd like to see from our police officers, if you will, and we usually have 2 officers on duty at a time out patrolling and so forth. And if there are 2 officers downtown who are faced with literally dozens and dozens of people not wearing masks, I've been trying to get my brain around this for the last month or 2 since this discussion first came up. And I can't quite imagine what it would look like. I can tell you one thing it would look like. I can see a lot of folks who are antagonistic and opposed and white supremacists or whatever coming to Yellow Springs, hearing that we have a required mask ordinance, that hippie town, coming out and really causing a ruckus or something along that lines. If anyone has a way that this could work effectively, I say let's run it through the mill. However, the way it stands now, what would we do? Pass a village ordinance? Well, then you're looking at a $120 minor misdemeanor plus $80 court costs. So you're going to tell someone from Fairborn who comes here a lot or wherever, Spring Valley, you're wearing a mask, here's an ordinance to appear in our mayor's court. Is it going to be a citation like a traffic ticket? Okay, they can send in a check for $20, $30, $40, whatever is decided. But I just am trying to see 2 officers downtown doing the kind of work that would be necessary to back this up. I just fear for our village what this would look like. So thoughts?
Brian, you're on mute.
Yeah, I was just going to say, yeah, there is follow up on what Pam just talked about. We'll put that in the stack. I have Shane Creeping Bear next.
Hello. First of all, yeah, thank you all for hosting this format conversation. I have a lot of thoughts about what's happening in the village and what's happening around the country. One of the things that comes to mind immediately, this is sort of circling back to a point that Matt Carson brought up, the police budget. So I'd like to really I put this in chat, I'd really like to be in part of the conversation around reallocating those funds to youth programs. I was part of the Human Relations Commission years ago, back in probably 2008, 9, 10. Part of the role of the Human Relations Commission was to hear complaints, police complaints, and I don't think that it was an effective governing committee, because even though our job was to hear those complaints and protect the citizens, there was no way for citizens to make a complaint without outing themselves or putting themselves in a vulnerable position. So it was ineffective. Now in my current role, I've been working at Antioch College for 10 years in the Office of Admission. One of the things that really kind of hooked me into this field was my ability to work with first-generation students and students of color as part of our mission at the college to serve underserved students and people from all over the country that might not have access to a high-end liberal arts education. I work closely with communities in Texas, Chicago, New York, DC, and I bring Black and brown kids to Yellow Springs. Every year, these students are harassed by the police. I even had a student come from New York City who was, he did not actually believe, he's a Black student, he did not actually believe that racism still existed, right? He was stopped by the police 4 times in the first week that he was on campus, right? And I hear this every year by the people in town. So who are we serving by doing this to the people who are trying to make comfortable in this town? And I see a lot of our council members, our village management team out at these protests wanting to be allies and really understand sort of the things that are happening in the country right now. How can we help? How can Yellow Springs step up to the plate? We are not the only ones who will be discussing defunding police and reallocating funds. The budget line item that Matt brought up is closer to 1.6, and I'm sure they're drawing funds from other resources and budget lines as well. Mediation is under 10,000, like 10,000, under 10,000 for our youth center. We can be doing better, and we should be doing better. I think I've said a lot here, but I'll leave it at that. I do want to be a part of these conversations as they move forward, and I imagine they are going to start occurring more online and social media spaces. Yeah. Okay. That's what I'm saying for now.
All right, thank you, Shane. Much appreciated. And yeah, it can't escape the fact that there is a lot of connection between these two issues. So one thing I wanted to respond to, because I saw some questions in the chat and some suggestions related to what Mayor Canine brought up about enforcement and violations. So there were some ideas about, that I see about warnings and lower fines. I do want to share that I've done a fair amount of research over the past couple of weeks about what different communities are doing. I still have not seen a community in Ohio that has made it a legal requirement for face coverings. But some that I have seen have included self-compliance. So there's no penalty, there's no enforcement by the police officers, but there's a statement that this is an expectation. So that is how some communities have handled it. I've seen others that have suggested lower fines, and I think that that is an issue that we can explore a little bit more. Did anyone have other comments related to that? I'm just checking. But I'm open if people are aware of other models that are out there. Okay.
So this is Lisa. One comment I'll make, just not as a council person, but just in terms of things I've heard. There are places that are taking a very direct and draconian approach, and their idea is that if they would just arrest a few people right away, that then other people won't do it, and this is mostly on the West Coast in Washington State, even in tourist areas. But the difference is that I'm seeing as I talk to people around the country, as a nurse working with nurses who work all over the country, is that what we lack is any kind of support from our county or our state. And so I understand the science, and I cannot tell you how much time I spend thinking about this. Yes, I have read Dr. Lee's article and many, many other things. I understand the science. But what I am concerned about, and I want to talk about this more on Monday at the formal council meeting, is how we will navigate enforcement when we're, there's that Yellow Springs bumper sticker, 1.8 square miles in the center of reality. And how are we going to enforce it and keep our citizens safe from other kinds of threats? So I want you to know, I'm not saying I'm against trying for this legislation, but I am afraid of other kinds of threats as a result of doing it. So, and I am unable to find any other small community lacking health department on even a county level. I mean, even if the county would back us up in a heartbeat, but we have no support. And this is a concern for me, but I want you to know I understand how you feel.
Thanks, Lisa. Marianne, I see your hand.
Yeah, I'm not going to speak to all the different options or whether we should legislate it or not. But when I see visitors, and it's almost always visitors downtown, it's mostly young people, I think how rude, how disrespectful. I mean, that is my first impression. And as I'm thinking, well, someone said, can't they read? But I've also started wondering, we've tried to be nice. In fact, what does that little sign say? Be kind. I think maybe we're being too obtuse with people. And whether or not we make it an ordinance or whatever it would have to be, the idea of being very direct, forget be kind and the heart and everything. Just say, this is what is expected in downtown Yellow Springs or whatever. I really, maybe people come here because they think, oh, you can do whatever you want in Yellow Springs, you know, that in fact, that's probably why they come here, because, and they're just not getting, I think, where I think most of our values are right now. And I think somewhere or other, we need to have people who are visiting Yellow Springs get where most of us are, which is wearing masks, social distancing, and taking this seriously.
And we certainly see that with the Saturday protests that have happened, at least in terms of the mask wearing. Yeah, I think, you know, it looks like we're going to
Brian, Sam Eckenrode wants to comment.
Excellent. Sam?
Sorry, unmuting. I just wanted to say that I'm against letting the bullies win. And it's not even letting the bullies win, it's letting the fear of potential bullies win. So I think that should not keep us from doing what we know is the right thing. And I think it's going to become much clearer very quickly what the right thing is as coronavirus cases surge and more and more people are directly affected. And that's happening now in Dayton. It's happening in Columbus. We've crested 2 million cases in the United States already. And we're just at the very beginning of this. So why not be on the cutting edge and not worry too much about enforcement? You know, we can come up with good enforcement models such as, you know, put your mask on, pass it on, or, you know, the shopkeepers are already saying to their customers, we prefer that you not come in unless you're wearing a mask. That really puts a huge burden on them. And I have to say, frankly, it's a big reason that my doors are shut and going to stay shut until I know that coronavirus is no more a threat. But right now, I think we're on the very forefront of the curve. And I would like for us to maintain our reputation as progressive, educated, forward thinkers.
Thank you, Sam. Yeah, great comments. And I see that Pan Reich wanted to make a short statement.
Yeah, you know, it's not necessarily all or one. If the council members are really concerned about enforcement downtown, the science does support the fact that transmission risk is lower outside. You know, even on a sidewalk, if you're passing somebody within a few feet, you're only there a second, the chance of transmission is incredibly low. So maybe a compromise to at least consider is a village ordinance requiring masks inside downtown, in public places, stores, the Bryan Center, anywhere else is public. You know, if there's gathering of people even outside, that gathering should have masks. But if you wanted to keep it not on the sidewalk, at least, I think that would buy us a significant amount of protection. Thank you.
Thanks, Pan. And I will say there's more research to be done on this, but there are communities that have specifically focused on a requirement to wear masks in shops as opposed to outside. So that is a way that it's been approached. I do want to share something I heard at the chamber meeting yesterday that is a relevant comment, which was the idea that we should not just be targeting masks, but that there should be more of a distancing, face coverings, and sanitizing, hand washing, that sort of thing. And I thought, I think that was a really good thought that we should consider. Other comments? Laura Curlis, do you want to, I see something in chat.
Oh, I just wanted to point out that this chamber took a survey recently of businesses, and the overwhelming number of them wanted the ability to set their own policy and I've been in on some of those meetings, and they have their own philosophy, their own view about what's best for their business. And the other thing I would love for people to comment on, because I have been trying to follow the science and listening to Governor and up until recently, Dr. Acton, you know, and I'm hearing the R naught factor is below 1, that we, because Ohioans have been doing such a good job, that we're not seeing those spikes, where it's the 12th of June and we've had heavy crowds for 6 weeks. And I kept waiting for the bad stuff to happen. And maybe it's because Greene County still has so relatively few cases as a county. And so that may change. And so it is a fluid situation, no doubt. But I've been so relieved that we haven't had this huge number of cases despite the influx of visitors. I read the New York Times and the Washington Post every day, and in the New York Times just a couple days ago, you know, rules for living through a pandemic. And they believe that there's very low incidence of getting it when passing on a sidewalk, for example. So it's hard to know what to do. And I would love to hear more about the science of, and I've read plenty about 2 masks, how far are you apart, the farther the better. And masks definitely help. But I'm worried also about having our police officers up close and personal with people as they have to be, people who are unmasked, to enforce this. And there's so many people that it would have to be enforced against. That's kind of where my thoughts are, is that it's going to be, as Mayor Pam said, an enforcement nightmare. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Laura. Well, I'll tell you what, since, you know, we have had a little bit more time for some council perspective. Kevin Stokes, do you want to add anything based on what you've heard? Or
Well, I think, I mean, it's definitely a delicate balance that with respect to, you know, the mask thing. I think the point that I believe you just made, that it's not just masks, it's also the distancing and the hand washing. But then also, when you consider the fact that we have tried the low-key approach for a while. I mean, it was not, you know, there was never a time limit on anything, because we don't ever know how long anything is going to last, and we really don't know what the future is. But I think we've been doing, the county and the village have been doing as well as we have, because we have taken a more cautious approach and moving more slowly with respect to opening. You know, but I think with respect to an ordinance or taking things to the next step, I think this might be the time to consider whether this is the time, or when will be the time, to do something more than what we've been doing. Because, you know, even though we're not opening up as much, where the folks around us and the communities around us are opening up, and we're getting more and more visitors coming in, if they're not being compliant, I think someone just made the point, let's make the change and let enforcement take care of itself. So I am certainly, just based on the fact that we've taken the least invasive approach, if you will, or the be kind approach for long enough, but at some point, I think it's going to become incumbent on us to do something different, whether it's an ordinance or something different. But I think it's time to consider being a bit more strict.
all right, thanks, Kevin. Are there other questions or comments that I'm not seeing? Okay, well, let's see. I see Chief Carlson is on the line. So, Chief, we've got a little bit of time if you want to share some perspective.
Thank you, Brian.
Yep.
Yeah, I really appreciate everyone's input. I'm grateful that we are such a close community, that we can have these direct conversations and, really try to facilitate some positive change. I appreciate whoever gave some praise to council and village leaders about the actions that we have taken since the pandemic hit. I thought we were ahead of the curve, and I think that has helped. Please understand, everyone, we have two sides that we hear and are argued. Some of us were in less favor of opening the public restrooms. Some of us were in favor of keeping them open when the pandemic hit. Some of us were in favor of closing off the public parking because the parks were closed. Some of us were in favor of leaving the parking open. So the constant back and forth is important. And I think as Kevin said, we need to find that balance. I do see citing people for masks or confrontations about masks problematic from a law enforcement perspective. I'll just be straight out that, I personally feel that's in direct conflict with the policing style that you've tasked me to continue in Yellow Springs. But I think that maybe we could find a happy medium there. And, when the weather's good, everyone comes to Yellow Springs. So our weekends are just as busy as they've ever been. And on a personal note of advice for everyone, the best thing that I can recommend if there is an uncomfortable situation is to remove yourself from it if possible. And feel free to contact us anytime. We will be there and arrive in our typical friendly fashion.
And Brian, if I may,
Yes.
I support everything that Chief Carlson has said, and it's been a challenge because we've had to weigh all the interest of our community or all of our stakeholders. That being said, while the enforcement is difficult and it will be a challenge, we will enforce what's on the books. We will do our best to do the enforcement. So I know there's been issues around whether we can enforce it. Yes, it'll be a nightmare, as Mayor Pam said, but we will do what we must.
Yeah, and I think a point related to that is, making sure we understand what we're prioritizing, since there is a lot of activity going on, especially when we're busy in town. So, Kate Hamilton, did you want to make a comment?
Well, am I on?
You are on.
I think I've made a lot of comments, so I don't, as usual, so I don't actually know. I don't even know where I left off. I was kind of chatting along with everything. I get a little tired of consistently hearing that if you are high risk or if you feel uncomfortable, avoid it, or if you can't find a parking spot, then walk downtown, that sort of thing. And I know it shouldn't just be about the money that we spend, but I spend a lot of money to live here, and everyone does. Our workers, can't live here, most of them. They're working 2 or 3 jobs. It's up to us to protect them. It's up to us. You can't say just don't go into your own town. There's a reason that we live in a small town. It's for the convenience. It's knowing your neighbors. It's being able to walk to the drugstore, going to walk to Tom's. I can't shop at Tom's now. I'm high risk. My child's high risk. And maybe we're expendable. I don't know. But, we gotta show where our heart is and what we care about. Yeah, I've said a lot to you guys. I probably talk to you weekly. So thank you. That's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Hey,
Yeah. Thank
I'd
you,
like
Kate.
to clarify one thing, Kate. I appreciate your words. I wasn't suggesting don't come into town by any means. I'm simply stating that when you have that problematic situation, say there's a few people grouped in front of Tom's, do the best you can to keep yourself safe and call up.
Right. And I don't have a problem calling you, but it is problematic for many people to resolve an issue like that in a very confrontational way. And it is problematic for many people to call law enforcement. That's not a natural thing to do. It's something that we should not have to do. It's something that should be taken care of as a public health issue so that we're not put in that position.
Yeah, I agree with you there for sure.
But thank you. Thank you for letting me speak.
Yeah, thanks again. I appreciate that perspective. And I'll say, this has been an ongoing conversation. I think, as we've gotten more and more information and are trying to understand the dynamics of a ever-changing situation, this is really important. And this, I'm learning more and more about what we should be thinking about. So I do want to say, since we've got a little bit more time, some of the issues that I think we need to consider that would be helpful for any action we take are, in particular, what is the objective? Because again, one of the things that I'm hearing is that different communities are approaching this and focusing on particular areas. So I think Pan spoke to that, and that's one of the things we've got to make sure that we understand the specifics around the problems that we're addressing so that what we do is relevant. So that's a piece of this. I think I agree that some of the other things around, what would enforcement look like and whatnot could be figured out, and that could be more in line with what our general policies are when we do enforce things. So I want to, give any further opportunity for questions or comments. Again, I think everyone knows that we will be discussing this at our Monday council meeting. Lisa, were you thinking about saying something?
No, the only thing that I would say is thank you so much, because I think I'm so glad that we called for this session. I think it's been really helpful, and thank you.
All right, thanks, Lisa.
Brian, I'd like to second that, because we've had all the various town hall meetings, over the last several weeks, and the participation might have ebbed a bit, but I think this shows that we certainly have an engaged community, and I appreciate the residents having an opportunity and us being available to them to hear their concerns. So this is, this is democracy in action.
Yeah, I think it's been, we are definitely listening, and I think I can speak for all of us as decision makers in having to question assumptions and respond to new information on a very regular basis. We definitely need to look at this seriously. It's become clear that this is a significant concern for citizens. So then the next question again is, what can we do to actually do something about it? Okay.
Brian, can I just make a suggestion? It's interesting how we jump right away to enforcement and having our police department that we sometimes get really angry with enforce things that we want to see happen. And I'm wondering if maybe that conversation can go into the town hall format or go out to business owners more to say, what are the solutions that you have to gaining more compliance around mask wearing, around distancing, when you have customers who need to use the public walkway to enter your store to distance themselves? What kind of solutions other than police action could you see as being effective here? Because I feel like maybe we've skipped a middle step and that there are other options that might work.
Thanks, Judy. Okay. I am, I guess, going to wrap things up unless we have any other questions or comments. Okay. Well, again, we appreciate everyone. Remember, we are listening. The conversation has been ongoing, but I will again wrap up with, these are two issues that I expect us to start taking action on and making specific decisions about, and making thoughtful decisions that make a difference. So with that, I believe we're going to first close the meeting. So can I get a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Hold on, don't adjourn yet. Wait. No adjourning.
Oh, wait.
No
Don't adjourn.
Yes, everyone.
Okay, we're just a listening session.
That was just practicing.
Take a deep breath. All right, yes, I knew we had the executive session. I just, I've been out of protocol mode for this. Okay, so can I get a motion to move into the executive session for the purpose of discussion of property?
I move.
All right, do we have a second?
I didn't know we were doing this tonight.
Neither did I, but I second.
Okay. I mean,
sorry, it's on the agenda. I gotta go. Be brief.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. All right. Okay. Hi, community members.
Surprising.
We're in action live.
House.
Yes.
Queen.
Yes.
Stokes.
Yes.
Krieger.
Yes.
Thank you. Curlis.
Yes.
Okay. So we will now, Josue, are we going to move into a separate room or?
Yes, I'm going to create a break room for the executive session, and it will just be the participants. Thank you, everyone, for joining us tonight. It was a very fruitful conversation. Appreciate all your feedback. Thank you.